Hi, I'm Jess, part-time hobbit, and I'm here to talk to you about Tolkien. Let me set the scene for you. The year is 2007, and you've taken a train from your small village into London. You walk off of Drury Lane into a dark theatre to see a stage wrapped in curling branches. Sparkly figures with braided hair peek out from behind the massive sign on stage that proclaims the production to be The Lord of the Rings. The lights go down, and the show begins. You then forget about the experience for the next 14 years because you were 8 years old and had a brain like a spaghetti strainer. You're me in this exercise, if that wasn't clear. I feel like it got a little confusing and meta towards the end there, but yeah. If you couldn't tell, I saw the Lord of the Rings musical when it was playing in London, and I remember very little about it. However, it seems like most of the world remembers very little about it. Even out of my audience on Instagram, only 30% of you had ever even heard of it, and I would call you guys moderate to severe Lord of the Rings fans. Today, I'm gonna talk to you guys about this musical, what it was, its history, and what happened to it. Here to help, we have my parents. Hi!
Hello, I'm Dad. She's Mom.
And I'm Mom, yeah.
They took me to see the show and they remember marginally more about it than I do.
Can you tell me a little bit about your personal experience with Lord of the Rings?
I would have to say that I'm probably more familiar with it because of my dear family than I would otherwise be. But that's not a bad thing. And I have read the books and I really enjoyed the books.
And I was assigned The Hobbit as a book to read in 7th or 8th grade. It was actually one that I actually read and enjoyed it. Yeah, I was always interested in things like Dungeons and Dragons, and knowing that was some of the main source material for that fine game. It just was an interesting part of my life from the time I was a teenager.
They'll pop in every once in a while to offer their memories and opinions. The Lord of the Rings musical was first created in 2006, headed by a group of producers that included the likes of Saul Zaentz, who's known for, this. The production was a massive undertaking from the very start. It was a 3-hour and 45-minute extravaganza with a 65-actor cast, 2 intermissions, a full musical score, and a $25 million budget. The automated stage alone cost $1.2 million and weighed 30 tons, which is as much as 200 reindeer or a 1986 John Deere 790 excavator. The costumes and props were just as elaborate, with characters on stilts, trapeze work, hundreds of pieces of armor and weapons, and if this just sounds like a lot, that's because it was. The original Toronto production was lauded as having moments of satisfying spectacle and elegant design, and being an unmitigated critical and financial disaster. So, you know, middling. However, the great cogs of show business were still turning. The Toronto production closed to size of relief in 2006, but work was already underway to open up a production on London's West End. The Lord of the Rings musical found its home in the historic Drury Lane Theatre. In order to accommodate the massive automated revolving stage, the historic Victorian substage had to be removed and then reinstalled after the run. Needless to say, it was expensive. The production was gonna have to generate $350,000 per week if it wanted to break even. And from the get-go, things were not great. Early on in previews, the 2,000 and 300-person audience got to watch the show screech to a halt as an actor on stage fell and began screaming, "My leg, my leg." I only joke because he made a full recovery and later rejoined the production. Don't worry. The actor's leg had managed to get caught in the incredibly expensive stage mechanics, and let's just say this wasn't a good omen for the production. Still, the Lord of the Rings musical officially opened in July 2007, and the opening night performance was attended by theater stars like Andrew Lloyd Webber and Judi Dench, who only had positive things to say about the production. Other reviews for the show were mixed. It had been trimmed down and edited from the Toronto version, and I'll admit, I don't think it was all bad.
The effects were really cool. The lighting and the costumes and the running around on those stilt things, that was really cool.
Living in England where we did, being a short train ride away from London and the West End, it was always nice to be able to go see shows there. To see something come up that was Lord of the Rings related was kind of nice. I still have my mug that I got there.
The family Lord of the Rings mug.
Indeed. And it has a great quote, "May the hair on your toes never fall out," which has been a good reminder for me. Good lesson for life. You know, the costuming and the lighting, they had an amazing movable stage. It seems sort of like, I would say, like Cirque du Soleil, where they were flipping around a lot. Parkour kind of movement.
Parkour!
Really made it interesting to watch in that respect, but as you said about some musicals, it did go on.
Ultimately, though, the problems with the production were deep. First off, the show just had so many moving parts that stage managers reported that out of over 400 runs of the show, there was never a single production that occurred without any problems. Although the show was trimmed down to a tight 3 hours, it seems that whatever had been holding the original production together was left on the cutting room floor.
Like, do you remember it, like, making sense?
No.
Most of the political and historical elements had been left out, leaving behind emotion and spectacle. This may have worked for some productions, but if you cut the history and world building out of The Lord of the Rings, you're left with something that's frankly generic, but with dancing hobbits. To the designer's credit, they executed a vision of Middle-earth that had never been seen. The designer, Rob Howell, refused to watch Peter Jackson's films as he wanted his Middle-earth to have a completely different design aesthetic. Standout moments in this regard were the Lothlorien scene that involved elves in sparkling costumes dropping out of the sky on silks to sing, or a Balrog that actually blew leaves and debris into the audience with the power of its presence. Gollum's character was introduced crawling headfirst down the stomach-dropping height of the proscenium.
Having the orcs and such be all hunched over and really tight to the ground and sort of rolling and moving around a lot, and then putting the elves on those kind of stilts like they use when they put drywall in the ceiling. I'll give them credit for that. It did have some value in that either you or your sister were sitting right on the edge of the row, and when the orcs or goblins came down creeping from the back of the theater, you turned and looked and you were like 6 inches away from an orc in his
I
in his
believe
helmet.
that was Kate.
I think it
Might
was.
have been your sister. Very definitely got her attention, and that was good.
Would
No,
you?
it wasn't.
Unfortunately, dazzling spectacle does not a good show make.
I think when it comes to putting something like that on a stage, you can throw all the money in the world at it and get some really remarkable practical effects and lighting. But if the heart of the story is kind of distilled away to the point where it's not really very coherent, no amount of money spent on the budget or quality acting or the songs is really going to get you across to where you need to be. I think it's all about the engaging story in my perspective.
I would have to agree on that. Like, I remember things about the musical, but I don't remember anything about the story.
The plot was impossible to follow. The music was somewhat engaging, but utterly unmemorable, and one reviewer claimed the production was not for connoisseurs of acting. When discussing it with my family, I found out that over the last 14 years, some of the memories they had of the musical weren't even actual scenes from it.
The only one I remember is a slow song that some hobbits were singing on a bridge, I think. I could be imagining this, I don't know. But it was like a girl hobbit and a boy hobbit, and they were singing some slow, boring song, and I just wanted it to end.
If that's a real thing.
It's a made-up tale. It's a total fabrication. It never happened.
I saw a live show of Les Miserables when I was 7 years old, and there are moments from that show that I still think about today. So why is it that this musical, adapted from the books that have inarguably had the largest impression on my personal life, just didn't stick? They tried to do something different, but managed to alienate lovers of the books by not telling the story. Non-fans were alienated by the lack of any comprehensible story at all.
I can't imagine trying to sit through it if you hadn't already known the story either from reading it or watching the movies.
I would like to argue that this production was doomed from the start, no matter who they had behind it or how much money they threw at the problem. In my opinion, musicals excel with simple, contained stories. The Lord of the Rings is neither simple nor contained by any stretch of the imagination. They pulled a reverse Hobbit and tried to cram over 1,000 pages of rich fantasy into a 3-hour show. But the problem goes deeper than just there was too much story for one stage. Tolkien himself was vehemently against against stage adaptations of fantasy stories. In his essay on fairy stories, he wrote, "Drama has, of its very nature, already attempted a kind of bogus, the visible and audible presentation of imaginary men in a story. To introduce, even with mechanical success, into this quasi-magical secondary world a further fantasy or magic is to demand, as it were, an inner or tertiary world. It is a world too much. To make such a thing may not be impossible. I have never seen it done. My theater degree and I are quaking." To Tolkien, any theater production already involves the suspension of disbelief. The frat boy with a plastic crown transforms into a king under stage lights. The kid with the papier-mâché lion head is a fearsome beast, and the woman in the thrift store prom dress is the president's wife. Once you tried to add magic onto the suspension of disbelief, Tolkien thought that it was a step too far, and crossed into the utterly unbelievable. Now, I don't agree with everything that he says there, because theater technology has improved a lot since he was last attending. We can't disregard this point entirely. Tolkien definitively wrote his story to be a book. There have been successful adaptations, but they're exceptionally difficult to make. Tolkien's world is not our own, and any attempt to present it has to meticulously draw the audience into this suspense of disbelief. This becomes easier with the help of sweeping panoramic shots of alien landscapes and epic immersive battles, but becomes very, very difficult 10 feet from an audience's nose. Is there a world in which Tolkien's stories could be adapted for the stage? I think so. Is it in the form of a $1 million mega musical? Maybe not. The Lord of the Rings musical is living, or formerly living, proof that not every problem can be solved with using the IP of a popular franchise and throwing a couple $1 million at it. Adaptation is hard, and you need a very deep understanding of what made the original source material tick. A good adaptation has the power to change the landscape of the entertainment industry, but a bad one? Well, it's lost in the pages of history, forgotten even by those that watched it with their own young, impressionable eyes. I have to know what you think of this whole ordeal in the comments below, so make sure you let me know. I am always so curious to hear people's opinions on this, especially people that are already dedicated Lord of the Rings fans that didn't know it existed. Make sure you subscribe so you can listen to me geek out about Tolkien every single Thursday afternoon, and like this video if you learned something. The link to my Ko-fi virtual tip jar is right in the description below if you want to send a couple dollars over to support the channel. Everyone say thanks to my parents for helping me out this week, and thanks all of you for joining me this week. And I hope that you all have a very happy, hobbity day.